Well, good morning. As I said before, the speaker today is going to be Garry Corbett. Can I get you to come up, Mr. Garry Corbett? He is, well, he'll introduce himself yet, but CEO at Siloam Mission. And I just want to pray a blessing over you, if I can, before you start. Heavenly Father, I thank you for the words and the heart that you've given this man. I just pray, Lord, that you just bless what he's saying today, that it would be received well, that you would make our hearts open to the words he has, God, that you would just make this place hungry for more of your kingdom and more of your spirit today, God. And I just pray, Lord God, your blessing over him today. In your name, amen. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning. I am so blessed to be here. I want to thank you for inviting me. I especially have looked forward to this day. It's surprising how God works in your life. I feel like I'm coming home. I was just sharing a little bit of my story before the service. And I said, years ago, I started off, I had gone to university, and then I decided that God had called me to seminary. He didn't call me to be a pastor, but I went to seminary and I finished it, and there was a little church up in the Northwest Territories. And the district superintendent said, Garry, would you go up there for 3 weeks and be a supply pastor? And I walked in the first day, and there was 8 members of the church. And I went, oh, this is going to be interesting, but I'm only have to be here 3 weeks. Well, 3 weeks turned into 3 months, turned into a year. And it was one of the most blessed times of my life. And then from that, I went into working with street kids. I got my PhD in psychology. I started working with individuals who are disabled. And then about 5 years ago, I retired. But God said, no, you're not. And from that, I was on the board of directors of Siloam Mission, and they came to me and said, Garry, would you go and be the CEO of Siloam Mission for 4 months? That's all we're asking. And I said, sure. However, I should have learned God's timing the first time, and that's coming up to, well, it's over a year and a half now. I've been blessed to be with Siloam Mission. However, I am retiring, please, Lord, next month. We were just talking about our great-grandchildren, and so I want to spend some time with our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And so as long as the Lord's willing, I was going to be 4 weeks today. As I was driving here, I live up by St. Anne's, and I was driving here, and I was thinking, 4 weeks today, I'm going to be taking this road down to someplace warm, as opposed to today. About 6 months ago, I was in my office, and I started feeling, well, it started the night before, but I started feeling this pain across my back. And it kept getting worse and worse, and I didn't know what it was. I figured maybe it pulled a muscle, maybe had gas. I didn't know. So I did what every man in this room would do, and don't deny it. I went to the internet and I said symptoms of a heart attack on Google. Every man does that. I couldn't find the symptoms. It said, you had pains in your chest and down your arm, and I figured, okay, I'm fine. Well, it kept getting worse and worse. And a few hours later, I went, okay, I'll go to the hospital. Went to the hospital, and my greatest fear was to embarrass myself. They do all the tests, and they come back and they say, Rolaids will fix that, or something similar. So I sat there for a few hours, and the doctor came in and looked at me and said, Garry, you're having a heart attack. Now, on the inside, not on the outside, I went, yes. I didn't want to be embarrassed. So I go through the surgery, and I'm sitting in the recovery room, or laying in the recovery room, and as I'm laying there, I'm starting to think, about my life and about Siloam Mission and about the people we serve. And a couple of thoughts came to my mind. The first was I didn't plan to have a heart attack. I didn't write in my Outlook, today you're going to have a heart attack. I didn't think about it. I was healthy. I didn't take any pills. I didn't take any medication. I figured my life was going along well. Then all of a sudden, my life changed. And I thought about the folks that you come down and help us with. The poor, the homeless, the vulnerable. And they don't plan to be that way. I don't know how many people I've met who used to be accountants and lawyers and doctors and principals of schools and on and on. They didn't plan it. They didn't say, I am going to be homeless. It just came out of the blue. It could have been because of a breakup in a marriage. It could have been because of onset of mental health issues or addiction, but they didn't plan for it. The second thing I learned very quickly was I couldn't heal myself. There was no way I could fix my heart. With God's help, I needed a team of individuals to help me. The surgeon, the nurses, the anesthesiologists, on and on. I couldn't have done it myself. Very similar to our folks can't do it themselves. They can't say, okay, I'm going to pull myself up by my own bootstraps and I'm going to get everything together. They need a team. They need a team of volunteers who come there week after week after week, volunteering their time, their love of Christ, their hope that life can be better. They need staff. They need donors in order to get them out of where they are. So I want to take you through some of the things that we're doing, Siloam, with your help. And then I'm just going to talk about why do we do this. So if I can, oh, we're already up. So we can just go to the first slide. What does homelessness look like? Next. Yep. There we go. Blessed is the one who considers the poor in the day of the trouble. In the day of trouble, the Lord delivers him. The Lord protects him and keeps him alive. He is called blessed in the land. Next. Present. Okay. Let's talk about what we do there. Anybody here ever volunteered in the kitchen? Oh, bless your hearts. I walk into the kitchen 2-3 times a day. If you're there in the evening, unfortunately, I'm usually not there. But if you're there for breakfast or lunch, I'm there. And I see these volunteers peeling and scraping and grinding and cooking. And last year, we served over 500,000 meals. Imagine that. 500,000. And when you consider Winnipeg only has, 700,000 or 800,000 people in it? 500,000. I was at a banquet the other day, and I'm sitting there with some other people from Siloam Mission, and I'm looking around, and there was like 500 people at the banquet, and I'm watching the waiters and the waitresses and run around and give out all the food, and I turned and I said, boy, this is surprising, how they can do this so efficiently. And that person turned to me and said, Garry, what are you talking about? We do that 3 times a day, 365 days a year at Siloam Mission. And unfortunately, one of the things that's happened is that every year I put a graph in. It's getting more. There's more people who are coming through our doors. The last 3 years and 2 years ago, it increased by 17%. Last year, it went up another 5 or 8%. I just got the statistics from our kitchen the other day, and we're up another 5%. We can't do that without God's people helping us, without His providence taking care of us. And I'm going to repeat this a number of times. One of the things that we're so thankful for, is God has given us a need over the last number of years. We used to be a soup kitchen on Main Street. I don't know if you ever saw that. We were a little tiny soup kitchen. God presented a need. And we go, okay, we can do that. And without understanding where it was going to come from. And every time God provided. And as we got larger and more people came into our doors, we kept going, well, God, where are we going to get this from? How are we going to feed 100,000 meals in a year, or 200, or 300, or 400, or now we're at 500? And God has said, be still and know that I am God. And every year, our donations have gone up. Every year, the food has come in the door. The other day, and I don't know where these came from. I don't know if it came from here or one of the colonies or whatever. We got cabbages that were, and I'm not lying to you, that big. We could feed like 300 people on one cabbage. God does provide. They were, I walked in and I said, what are these things? And cabbages. So God provides. Next slide. This one, I love this one. We serve over 1 million cups of coffee a year. That's like 2 Tim Hortons restaurants going full steam 24 hours a day. We get the same thing. 1 million cups of coffee a year. So, I mean, it's not as good as Tim Hortons. I don't want to say that, but there's 1 million cups of coffee served. Next. Clothing. One of the things that we did is we said, you know, our folks need a chance to get more opportunities to get clothing. Last year we had over 15,000 visits to our clothing department. People can come in twice a week. They sign up on a sheet and they come in and they can get clothing from head to toe, one outfit, and they can come in again. The things that we typically lack on in general are hygiene products and new underwear. So if you have any, we certainly gratefully accept them. And this time of year, it's warm men's winter boots we seem to be lacking on. As Jason was saying, one of the things is I don't prepare for winter. You know, they tell you to put your winter tires on, and they tell you to antifreeze and stuff like that. Well, I'm really poor at that. And we had such a nice fall, and then this week came, and we got caught in the blizzard, and my winter tires were off, and I wasn't sure about my antifreeze, but our folks are the same way. You know, they were in fall clothes. They had running shoes on. The 30 below came, and a lot of them weren't prepared. We had a man sleeping about a block from us. If you go onto our Facebook page, you'll see pictures of it. He was about half a block to a block away from us. And I drove by and I saw, and it was 25, 30 below, and he had made a bed on these steps with cardboard and blankets. And my reaction was, we're in 2016, and people are still outside. They're not prepared. Next slide. This is our shelter. We have 110 beds. 80% are for men and 20% are for women. One of the things that we're finding is that's historically 80% of the homeless are males. 20% of the homeless are women. That's starting to change. We're seeing more and more women, more and more younger women ending up homeless on the streets. So last year we had over 37,000 night visits in our emergency shelter. Every morning I get a notification from our shelter, how many beds did we have empty? And over the last year, I can count maybe on one hand the number of beds that were empty in our emergency shelter. They were, every night, were full. And I get a little notice down at the bottom of my email that says, we turned away 20 people last night, or 30 people, or 40 people last night. And my concern is, where do they end up? Some of them go to the Salvation Army, but we're not quite sure. And this, during the middle of summer, I don't worry as much because you can find a warm place under a stairs or a bridge. This time of year, I worry that our folks end up on the street. And if you read the paper last week, a woman perished out in the cold. We're not sure what the reasons for it were, but she was outside at 30 below, and they found her passed away. Next slide. This is one of the areas I am so proud of. It's our Saul Sear Medical Center. Saul Sear was a pharmacist in Winnipeg. When he passed away, he donated $1 million for us to set up our clinic. And the equipment that we're able to purchase is absolutely remarkable. It's that's donated or given to us at cost. I had the optometrist the other day say the optometry equipment that we have in the clinic is better than she has at her own office. So we're just blessed. We had over 3,500 visits to our medical clinic, and we have approximately 140 professional volunteers. These are doctors, dentists, optometrists, chiropractors, massage therapists, occupational therapists, physiotherapists, pediatric doctors, nurses, and others. I can never remember the whole list. But they come in and they donate their time to the most vulnerable members of our society. And we find two things get affected by homelessness. There's two areas of the body. One is the head, the teeth, and the other is the feet. If you go into our shelter or into our drop-in center and you talk to the homeless, those people who use our services, very quickly you'll find out most of them have, you can see, decayed teeth. They don't have the hygiene products that you and I take for granted. They can't get up in the morning and brush their teeth. They don't take care of them. They don't have floss. They don't go to the dentist. So one of the areas that's used a lot is our dental facilities. The other area that is affected for the homeless medically is their feet. They have usually ill-fitting shoes, and they'll get out in the sloppy snow or the wet weather, and you know what it's like. You get your feet wet, and you get a little sore on it, and then after time, that sore becomes bigger and more painful, and a lot of them come in with significant lesions on their feet, and many of them are diabetic, and if you know that with diabetes, there's often a lot of foot problems. So those are the two areas that we have, and we're so grateful for the folks that, the professionals that help us with our clients. Next. Future. Now, by the way, I didn't go into everything that we do. There are so many areas that we just don't have time. We could be here till tonight, and I know you don't want to be here till tonight, so I've just jumped over a bunch. One of the areas that I do want to just touch on that I don't have a slide for, that as I was thinking about it, that we're so grateful for, is that we have been able to add to our facilities taking care of the physical, the emotional, the social, and we're also so happy that we're now fully staffed on our spiritual side, providing spiritual care for the folks that we serve. We've dedicated a chapel on the 4th floor. If you're ever visiting us or volunteering, go up to the 4th floor, and we have a chapel there now. And we have 2 worship services a week that are attended by our folks. We're hoping to expand it to 3 worship services. And our 2 spiritual counselors, our spiritual advisors, our supports are fully booked all the time. And we're seeing a lot of change where people are saying, I want to not only change my outside, but I want to change on the inside. So that's one area that we're very pleased with. Can I have the next slide? The Madison. Part of the things that we do, and I think I have a slide. I think I got messed up here. Some of the things that we do deal with the present for individuals. Some of the things look at the future. The Madison is an apartment building that we have. It's about 5 kilometers from our main offices, and it has 80 apartment units in it. This is where people can go who have been using our emergency shelter and saying, I want a place of my own. They can go and they can have a room with their own bed, they can put their own stuff in, and they can lock the door. And they're there in their own place. And for many of them, I had one I was talking to the other day, and he had been living in our shelter for 2 or 3 months, and he got a place in the Madison. And he had moved in his first day, and he came to me with tears pouring down his face because now he had a home. He had a place where he could put his stuff. He had a place where he could lock the door at night and feel safe. Something that I take for granted. But he saw this as being the highlight. Next. Exit Up program. This is a special program. One of the things that we found when a census was done last fall, that 50% of the homeless have been a part of the child welfare system. When you think about that, kids raised in the child welfare system, 50% of the homeless came from that system. The Exit Up program is specifically designed for Indigenous youth coming out of the child welfare system, where they're given supports. And they have a place in the Madison. We have 12 suites for them. And it's really, I get reports back, and these are kids who everyone else has given up on. Well, we didn't give up. A lot of them moved into their own apartments. A lot of them are staying with us. We have one young gal, which I'm so happy to report. She started university to become a social worker this year, which is such a joy that she's going to move on and to do something with her life. We have the MOST team. Have you ever been in downtown Winnipeg and seen folks picking up garbage off the street? And they have vests on that say Siloam or MOST. That's the transition employment that we can provide to people. They go out every day. They cleaned 908 kilometers of Winnipeg streets last year. They picked up over 2,300 bags of garbage. And they're around, and it's such a joy. One of the things that I talked to the person that's the head of the MOST program, and they have these vests on that say Siloam Mission on the back. And she talked to them and said, well, do you want that on your back? That you're part of a homeless mission. And to a person, they said, yes. He said, the amount of respect that we get when we're out there picking up garbage, people come out and say, oh, you're from Siloam. Would you like a cup of coffee? Would you like a cookie? And so they don't want that sign taken off their backs. Next. Building Futures is our program to get people into work. My conviction is if all we're doing is providing food, clothing, and housing for individuals, we're not doing what God has called us to do. If all we're doing is warehousing, saying, well, here we'll feed, clothe, and house you, we got to provide them our exit ramp out of poverty, a way to get out. So we have a Building Futures, which is actually helping people get into jobs. And we have people who have been there who are now, we've had this program going for 3 years, and they've had jobs for the last 2, and they're doing well. They're living on their own. Some are superintendents in buildings. Some are working in all sorts of industries. And the success rate is higher than I've seen in any parts of the literature because we can support them in so many ways. Next. Our transition services team helps to set goals for individuals. If there are social workers or case managers, they provide services around education, employment, housing, or something as simple as getting identification. Many of our folks just don't have identification. Last year, 103 individuals our team was able to get off the streets and into their own homes. 103 doesn't sound like a lot, but that's absolutely phenomenal. 103 people are no longer living on the streets because our folks were able to find them a place to live. Next. And this is where I screwed up. I forgot I had this slide in, where we have our, and I think it's on our 4th floor, and it's called our upper room worship services, which I think is a really appropriate name. Next one. Volunteers. This is you. This is you. We have almost 9,000 volunteers. Almost 9,000 men and women, boys and girls. That's individuals. That's not the number of times they serve. That's individuals. You know, some come to Siloam for 1 hour a year, some come for 100 hours. But 9,000 men and women with tender hearts that say, we want to help. We could not do our job without 544 groups. Next one. Okay, it didn't show there. I guess I'm a little older, and so therefore I'm not really good at Outlook, or at, what's this, PowerPoint. I did have a slide in there. I went to our volunteer services, and I said, tell me about Open Doors Church and about what they've been given. And they said, without question, immediately they responded, and they said, this church is the most faithful church group that we have at Siloam Mission. You are the #1 most faithful group of getting people there, of having people come every week to help us. So from Siloam Mission and our volunteer services, thank you so much for what you do, because you're the best. New initiatives. Next slide. We have a couple of new initiatives that we just started. One is on mental health. We have a new mental health worker who's going to be setting up a team of people working around mental health. It's an area that we haven't been dealing with effectively over the years, so we have a new mental health team. Next. And we have recovery beds we've just put into place. The recovery beds are, if you've got a cold or the flu, it's not bad enough to go to the hospital, but you just feel crappy. And you're going around sniffling and sneezing, and you're just feeling terrible. Imagine if you couldn't stay in your bed, and you had to go outside, and you had to stand in a parking lot, or you had to stand on the street, or you had to walk around. So we've instituted recovery beds where it's a small number of beds where people can actually go and spend the day if they're feeling ill, or also if they've just had anesthetic from the dentist. It's a place to rest and get better. Next. Let me just talk quickly about some changes that we're going to be doing, and I just want to show you a quick film clip. Those of you who've been around Siloam Mission during the day, and they see the meals, and we have people outside who stand around the corner. Anybody seen that, where people stand outside? You know, in the middle of summer, that's fine. We have 140 seats, but we serve between 300 and 500 people per meal. And the people have to stand outside waiting till somebody finishes their meal, and then somebody else can come in. And during the summer, when it's nice and sunny and warm, it's great. But people are standing outside for half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour in this type of weather. So God has put it on our hearts and said, you need to have people, you need to make room for everyone to be at the table. So what we're going to be doing is, those of you who know where we are on Princess Street, we also own the building behind us, and we're starting renovations of that building. And by this time next year, or actually earlier, that building will be completed, and we'll have 500 seats in the dining room, and people will be able to immediately come in and sit down as opposed to being on the street. The second thing that we're going to be doing, our second phase, is that we're going to be putting in more emergency beds. We're going to build a link between that building and our building that we're in now, and we're hoping to add another 50 emergency beds so no one has to be out in the cold at night. So this is a project that we're going to be going over the next couple of years, and you'll be getting more news about it, but we've already started the renovations of the building behind us, and as I say, probably October, November, no one will have to stand outside waiting. Now this is Making Room. It's a clip on our new building. So if you want to show that short clip.
When you don't have a home, you build your own walls, brick by brick. One brick when someone looks away. One brick for every night alone on the street. Our walls protect us from the pain, hide the hurt. Brick by brick, our walls separate us. They shut us out. Siloam Mission builds walls, brick by brick. One brick for every hello. One brick for every meal. One brick for a good night's sleep. Our walls help instead of hurt, hold instead of hide. We need your help to break down walls and to build new ones. Brick by brick, we will.
Make room to end the line.
Make room to come in from the cold.
Make room at the table.
Make room for community.
Make room for a safe place to sleep.
Make room for opportunity.
Make room in your heart.
That's the theme of our moving forward, is making room for more beds, making room for more people at the table. So why do we do what we do? Why do you drive from Morris to Winnipeg? As I was thinking about this, I was reminded of the story of Jesus and the leprous man in Matthew chapter 8. Jesus had just preached probably his greatest sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, and he's coming down and he's surrounded by groups of individuals. And this leprous man came in front of Jesus and he kneels down. And you know that leprosy was seen as a punishment from God. Not only was it a physical ailment, but if you were a leper, you were seen as being punished by God. You had to, according to Levitical law, you had to leave your hair unkept. Your outer clothes, you had to leave torn. You had to wear a veil over your face, and as you walked through the streets, you had to yell out, "Unclean! Unclean!" You lived in colonies, and food was given to you that was dropped down to you in baskets. If somebody saw you as you were coming and they saw the way you were as a leper, they would run away from you. There were no handshakes. You couldn't shake the hand of a leper. There were no pats on the back, and I got some gracious and wonderful hugs when I came in today. You couldn't do that if you were a leper. There was no love expressed. You were never touched by anyone. You were unclean. Which makes this story so intriguing to me. The sequence of the story. The man says to Jesus, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. He had no idea how Jesus could do this, but he believed that he could be made clean. And Jesus makes an unprecedented move. Jesus said, I am willing, be clean. And with great compassion, Jesus then reaches out and touches the man. And immediately the man is cured. The man is healed by the touch. Can you imagine what that would have been like? Never to feel the warmth of another hand. For years, to be ashamed, to be an outcast. And not only were you touched, but you were healed. There's so many stories in the gospel that I could that relate to this, but there's one that I find extremely intriguing, where the compassion is shown by Jesus. This is probably one of my favorite stories in the entire Bible. It's in Luke chapter 7. Jesus is invited to a Pharisee's home for dinner. The Pharisee's name was Simon. He said, Jesus, come over for dinner. And like a good Pharisee, he had been raised in a tradition. The Pharisees said, if you see something sinful, run away from it. Keep yourself separate. Don't touch anything. Because not only something unclean, it also can make you unclean if you're ever around it. So keep your distance. It was this custom of the day when Jesus came that to enjoy some food and some fellowship. He was there with the Pharisee. And he probably sat at a large U-shaped table. And you would rest with one arm on the table. The table is probably a couple of feet off the ground. You'd rest with one arm and eating, and your feet would be out behind you. And so Jesus was there reclining and talking to the Pharisees. And then she came. We don't know her name, but we know some things about her. She was considered a sinner. Scholars say that she was probably a prostitute. She was obviously not invited to Simon's place. But in that day, it wasn't uncommon when a party was being held that the poor would go on the courtyard on the outside, hoping that somebody would come out and serve them the leftovers. And actually, it was a status symbol that if that occurred, because that meant you were really wealthy and you were a big deal, that you could actually serve the poor in the courtyard. And this young woman slips out of the street and into the building. And she's lingering in the shadows. And there is something about Jesus' message that had touched her. There was something about his ministry that got to her, that attracted her, gave her hope. And we learn a little bit later on in the story that she already had faith in Jesus. And she was there to show him gratitude. But nobody would allow her in. So she's watching from the safety of the outer courtyard, and she realizes that the person that she's come to love has not been shown some common courtesies. Nobody has washed Jesus' feet. Nobody has anointed his head with oil. These were all basic common courtesies that you did in a hot, dusty climate like Israel in the first century. They were disrespecting Jesus. Nobody had taken care of these basic needs. Imagine the courage that it took for this woman to slip out of the shadow and into the light. She was seen as not only a sinner, but she was unclean, unworthy to be around others. And the courage that it took for her to come out. She knows that she's going to be judged. She knows that she's going to be ridiculed. She's going to be told, get away. With her heart pounding, I can imagine as she comes forward, the pressure of that moment must have been horrendous for her. But she musters up the courage. And she steps out into the light. And she steps towards Jesus. And she has with her the most precious things that she possesses. That's an alabaster vase filled with perfume. And she walks over under the bright lights. And I'm sure the Pharisees that they were sitting around, all of their heads would be snapping towards her, condemning her with their eyes. All eyes were on her as she moved out of the shadows into the light towards Jesus. These were the people that were trying to make her life hard. Now she's standing directly behind Jesus. She's come to offer him her most precious possession. This is very expensive, the perfume. And Luke tells us that she falls on her knees and she begins to anoint Jesus' feet with the perfume. And with the emotion of the moment, she suddenly begins to sob. Tears were coming down her face, dropping onto Jesus' feet. And she's embarrassed because she realizes that she doesn't have a towel. What am I going to do? Every eye is on her. And she's weeping because she loves Jesus so much. He has given her hope. So she does the unthinkable. She reaches up and she unbinds her hair. And it falls. And in that day and age, no woman would ever unbind her hair in public. It was something that was reserved only for inside her home. It was the equivalent of running naked through the streets. But she unbinds her hair and she begins to dry her tears on Jesus' feet. And I'm sure the Pharisees looked around and said, this is what Jesus should tell her to get away. Don't touch me. Don't touch my feet. Get away. You're sinful. I don't want to have anything to do with you. He should demand her to stop doing that. He should be in a huff. She's crossed every ethical and social boundary that she could possibly cross. She's an uninvited social outcast. She's a sinner. She should not be touching Jesus. But Jesus sees in her something no one else in that room saw. Jesus saw in this woman something in her heart And he looks on her with compassion and sees the risks that she's taken. He sees the courage that it took her to be there and the pressure she's under. But she sees her gratitude. So in an extraordinary act of mercy, Jesus takes the focus off of her and places it on himself. That he's there to be with her. He's there to forgive. He's there to be gracious. So in our first story from Jesus, we see that with the leper, he was willing to touch those who are living in the margins. In this story, we see that he's willing to be touched by those who are living on the outside. That's why we do what we do. We follow Jesus' example. We follow the example that he set before us and said, take care of these, the least of these my brethren. Take care of the poor, and I'll be with you. But just don't worry about touching them. Let them touch you. Each day I go down to the drop-in and I spend some time with our folks down there, the homeless, those in poverty, those who are struggling. And they tell me their stories. And they touch my heart. The strength that they have. I think it was, I can't remember which millionaire or billionaire said, it must be tough running all these types of businesses that you have. And he said, no, it's not tough at all. He said, what is tough is to be poor and homeless. It takes courage to get up every day. It takes courage to meet each day head on. And so I'm touched as I'm talking to them because I see God's grace. God's grace in what we do. His mercy. And allows us to feel the pain that our folks go through. And allows us, as extensions of Christ, to be the healing touch in their lives. In closing, I want to thank you for what you do in your community here in Morris, for the light that you're shining to the people around you. By reflecting Christ in everything that you do and say, we're called to be his children and to love our brothers and sisters. And I also want to thank you so much for those who volunteer at Siloam Mission. You are a light to us. You are the touch of Jesus to broken lives. And we're so thankful for every one of you. Let us pray. Our Heavenly Father, we are humbled in your presence. You served with a servant's heart. We want to reflect that as we work and be around others. Help us to understand what it means to be a healing touch to the world and to allow the world to touch us. And as we show compassion, caring, love to our brothers and sisters who have different gifts. They may not have the gift of wealth. They may not have the gift of prosperity, but they have gifts that they can give to us of wisdom, knowledge, joy. And until we see you face to face, may we be your heart, May we be your voice. May we be your hands of love in everything that we do and say. We ask this in your precious name, a name above all names.